In our previous videos, I had discovered thrash metal and decided I liked it enough to buy a drum set and start a band. I learned some lessons along the way, mainly in humility, but I was finally breaching the inner bowels of the underground metal scene. There, awaiting me, was a club and scene I would fall in love with in the spring of 1999. This band that Patrick and I formed with Chris never really had an official name, but I called it Submit. The reason I called it this is because it seemed like the old internet, all the buttons to, let's say, leave a comment on a message board just said Submit, and I thought it sounded cool. Around this time period, my father had become convinced that this internet thing was here to stay, and possibly that you could even see boobies on it too. So he bought the family a web TV, which was a device which had a small box not unlike your cable box, which would attach to your television and phone line. At the time, my family still had the same floor model television that I grew up with. It was probably about 15 years old, but still worked like a champ. Web TV came with a small wireless keyboard, and you could use it to input your information. I remember my account name very well, because I sort of picked it on a whim and thought it sounded cool. Wehrmacht 17. If you're unfamiliar, the Wehrmacht is the name used for the army in the no German times. I did not know this. However, I was using it as a reference to my current favorite band, Slayer. You see, I used to comb over minute details in the liner notes and read all the thanks lists and all of that. So I noticed Slayer's fan club from the 80s was called the Slatanic Wehrmacht. I definitely found out, through a host of random emails and people in chat rooms throughout the year or so we had the device, that it definitely meant something else, and that seemingly no one got my reference to Slayer. I would get emails from people like F you, POS no German, and I would also get emails from people like, hey, do you want to come to my super secret chat room, brother? And I was like, this is weird. And it definitely didn't care about any of that and was just there for metal and possibly boobies. So the band saw Chris eventually leave after a few practices with Submit. He was off to hook up with the old Elsewhere singer in another band that sounded more like a contemporary metal band at the time. Chris wasn't quite yet to fully commit to playing extreme metal. And honestly, I don't blame him. I often look back and wonder how it would have been if I embraced the new metal scene and aesthetic, and had just lived that moment in time. To me, it seems like one of the last really great movements in American heavy music, and I regret not having a band called Dust Cover, or some dumb shit, and just playing bounce riffs to the quiet part of Smells Like Teen Spirit in 10 different songs, being popular and being part of the thing. Instead, I hated the current thing with a passion. I started viewing nu metal bands as the same equivalent as bands like Poison or Motley Crue. They were the hair metal bands of our decade, and in a few years, people would look at their ridiculous balloon jeans and spiky hair and wonder what they were thinking, playing this incredibly formulaic and radio-friendly slop. It wasn't all slop, and I know that now. But at the time, the crusade against it felt very real. In a few short months, nu metal would see a black horse rising to the Midwest in the form of a little band called Slipknot. This was their signal that the party was over soon. They just didn't know it yet. So, in Submit, Patrick and I needed a bass player, and didn't really know anyone who played bass that would be interested in jamming with us. One day, I was hanging around where the kids all load onto the buses, and I was showing some CDs to one of the old heads that still went to school there, and I was telling him how we needed a bass player since Chris had left our band. From over our shoulder, a skinny kid with blonde hair chimes in that he plays bass, and he'd like to come and try out for our band. This guy was named Phil, and I knew him for a little while. We ran in some of the same circles, but I really had no idea he liked metal. He just looked like another normal kid back then. So Phil comes over and of course gets invited into the band. And my memory is fuzzy at the time, but I think Phil joined this band, and then the guy from a few houses down also joined on guitar. So now we had a four-piece death metal band with Patrick being the singer and rhythm guitarist. As fate would have it, Patrick would break a finger on his fretting hand in June, so the band stopped playing for a hot minute while he healed up. During this time, myself and the fellow from a few houses down the road started becoming more aware of the shows coming to local clubs around us. I remember distinctly trying to go to a show in late March, but the guys I was supposed to get a ride from never showed up. So later in April, we made plans to go to the next show, which was going to be at the local club called Twisters, located at 929 West Grace Street in Richmond, Virginia. This venue is legendary in Richmond lore, only the true initiates having been there to pledge fealty to the metal gods in this 200 to 300 capacity sweatbox. I remember drinking huge gulps of lukewarm water out of the large water jugs like you would see at a sports event getting dumped on the winning team. I remember holding my breath every time I had to go take a leak, but still trying to read all the band stickers and graffiti before the air ran out. I remember an older metalhead pointing to all the stains on the ceiling from where Gwar would constantly blast the joint with fake blood, pus, etc. And in retrospect, I can't imagine seeing Gwar in that tiny place. I remember making calls from the payphone in the very back to tell my dad to come pick me up. It was a magical place, and while Strange Matter did what it could during its run, and I respect it, nothing matches the original ambiance and aura that is Twisters. So, we were off to Twisters. It was my first show ever, and I was stoked, and also a bit nervous. I didn't really know where the place was, but my friend from down the street, who we'll call Dominus, is with me, and we are rookies together. I remember distinctly after waiting in the line outside for what felt like eternity and absorbing the chatter from the older guys like a sponge, I walked into the venue, past the bar, all the way to the end. I found the bathroom. Where the hell is the stage, I thought. I turned around and looked, and there by the front door was a small stage, probably less than half the size of a high school auditorium stage and much more shallow. I was taken aback. I had figured this legendary venue that everyone talked about would be bigger. The first band was Disinterment, who I had never heard of, but are a local to Richmond band, and play a sort of true mixture of death and black metal, leaning more on the black metal and the Gothenburg sound. They had two particular members, Chris Norris and Ryan Parrish, that went on to be in several successful bands, the most notable being Darkest Hour and Iron Reagan. I was very into this band's sound, picked up a copy of their CD Endless, and was extremely bummed to hear them announce it was their last show. They did wind up playing a few more shows. I got to see those too, thankfully. This band is a true hidden gem from the 90s, if you like melodic death metal even the slightest bit. The next band up was delivered to me by a stroke of luck. Unbeknownst to me, there were two tours happening by Earache Records recording artists converging on Richmond that evening. The show I was seeing at Twisters, and at another venue called Area 51 across town, Napalm Death was playing with a band called Skin Lab, if you remember those fellows. As fate would have it, that evening, Skin Lab wasn't going to make it to the other venue, so, in a move that would most likely never happen today for big bands like that, Napalm Death just came across town and played at Twisters instead. I don't know the deal that was worked out between the bands or clubs. All I know is now I'm officially getting to see the first death metal band I had ever heard. And I had been listening to their Fear, Emptiness, Despair cassette tape I had bought the previous year, so I actually knew some of their songs. It was madness. From the second they started playing, the entire floor of the club was just a fight. Kids moshing everywhere, while Barney Greenway's incessant barking drove them to fits of spiraling euphoria. It was during one of these that Dominus took a fist to the side of the head and crumpled quickly to the floor. Being a good friend, I rushed in to save him from being trampled by the voracious mob, but, much to my surprise, they were already 3 or 4 people helping him to his feet. It was at that moment I got it. Moshing was a group activity, almost like a sport. You get crazy when your favorite song comes on, maybe shoulder tackle someone to the floor and then help them up. You sweat, you get bruises, and on occasion you might see some blood. But you'll leave feeling like a new person, like a religious experience. I was hesitant to get in the pit. I didn't want to get trampled on or punched in the head, even though I saw countless examples of people being helped to their feet when they hit the deck. I couldn't help but notice the badass dudes from school were here too. Man, maybe they'll see me here and we can be friends now, I thought. Napalm Death incinerated my mind on a level I didn't even know was possible. But it didn't have long to rest, because the headliner on this night was none other than Morbid Angel. Morbid Angel was on tour for a new album they had released, Formulas Fatal to the Flesh, and I had added this to my collection the previous week in a trade with Dominus for a Boss DS1 guitar pedal that I somehow wound up the owner of after elsewhere, or at least it was at my house. Sorry guys. The album is inconceivably brutal, especially for a 16-year-old who didn't know much about death metal. All I know is that it went brrrr, and the singer's voice is turned up far past Satan. This quickly became my favorite album and band, cemented by their performance that night, their hair majestically blown by the large fans they had at the front of the stage, Trey's hands whipping wildly across the strings of the guitar as he summons forth solos from beyond the veil of this dimension. Steve, the new singer and bassist, literally looked like a Mortal Kombat character. His voice boomed throughout the narrow venue as I headbanged in the place I had found to stand, on a riser, safe from the massive and swirling barrage of flesh and bones. That was the mosh pit, the teens and 20-somethings slipping and sliding on the beer-soaked checkerboard linoleum floor, heads swirling and fists pumping, devil horns going up after every song, as well as the crowd's own death metal vocals that they would cheer on the band with at the close of every song. I paid particular attention to Pete Sandoval, who, to a guy who had been playing drums for only a year and just became good enough to play a few basic beats, this man was a wizard, a full-on cyclone of movement without seemingly moving at all. His body locked in place, and the mere flicking of his wrists would initiate savage blast beats, which were synced up with a strobe light, which gave the band an otherworldly appearance. Truly, it was magic. The next few days were a blur. I was back at high school trying to stop thinking about Twisters and those moments I experienced. I wanted that every day. I decided I would go to every show I could, and for the next few years, that was my battle cry. How long has it been since a friend of yours came to you excitedly and asked if you were going to the show? That was me. I was the absolute cheerleader for the Twister scene in Mechanicsville. Over the course of 1999, this place would become home, and I would go to shows that were sellouts and shows with 10 people there. I didn't care. I just wanted to be there.
See you guys next time. Subscribe for more metal stories.